Are you ready?
Yeah.
Yes!
This is the Ross Kaminsky Show.
You're a great American.
Now, Ross Kaminsky.
Come on, man.
On Denver's talk station, 630 KHOW.
What a great way to start the day. Oh, little Zorba the Greek. You know what that means. It means, oh, yeah, and there's the pipe. See the boat swaying right over there? Joining us for the 117th time, one of my favorite people, one of my favorite guests, Admiral James Stavridis, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, among many, many other things. He also ran the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, was dean there at Tufts University. And we'll talk about lots of other things that the Admiral has done. By the way, if you have not read 2034, a novel of the next World War, read it and prepare to be entertained, but also somewhat frightened. Admiral, good morning. Thanks so much for being here. And it's great to have you on Zoom for the first time, so folks can go to Facebook.com/630KHOW and see us both live right now. I'm not sure that's good at this time of the day, for them, but, it's good for us.
Well, I put on a sport coat for you, so we've got a nice look going on. But yeah, it's great to see you visually, and hopefully next step will be a trip to Denver, and I can come in studio and do this with you and your team.
That would be fantastic. I was allowed to have guests back in studio starting yesterday, so we can make that work. Is it true that you were promoted from 1-star directly to 3-star?
I was. It's extremely rare. It's not unheard of. I can name perhaps 2 other admirals who made that jump over the last 40 years. But I was just in a lucky position. I was coming off a combat tour in command of an aircraft carrier strike group, and the chief of naval operations put me up in front of DonRumsfeld, who's a pretty tough customer, and Rumsfeld hired me, and the billet to be Rumsfeld's senior military assistant was a 3-star job. So I jumped from 1 strike group command to in the Pentagon, effectively the military chief of staff to Don Rumsfeld. Hard job. He's a very demanding taskmaster. I learned a lot being around him. And then he was the one that promoted me to my 4th star. I went from there to be Commander, U.S. Southern Command. Wow.
Yeah, that's an unusual story, skipping around.
Actually, I'll give you a particularly unusual piece of it, not about Jim Stavridis, but about Don Rumsfeld. In 1976, the Secretary of Defense pinned on my ensign bars, if you will. He commissioned my entire class at Annapolis. That was Don Rumsfeld, 1976.
Wow.
2006, he pinned on my 4th star, Secretary of Defense. He was Secretary of Defense in the 20th century and the 21st century. The longevity of that is really quite remarkable. That's Don Rumsfeld.
Wow. All right, I've got a bad analogy for you to go along with that story. You ready?
Yep.
I saw AC/DC at Madison Square Garden in New York City when I was in college in 1985 or so. And then I saw AC/DC again at the Pepsi Center in Denver in about 2018. So more than 30 years apart. Seeing those boys play some rock and roll. That's Donald Rumsfeld-like longevity. Those guys should hang out.
The one I'll give you even better than that is the boss, Bruce Springsteen, who came and played a concert at the Naval Academy in 1975. And last I checked, that guy is out on the road, half the year playing away. I just saw him doing a bunch of interviews. Talk about longevity and talk about a distinctive voice in rock and roll. It'd be Bruce Springsteen. They don't call him the boss for nothing.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention that you have been awarded the Commander's Cross with Star of the Order of Merit of the Republic of Hungary. Any comments on that particular award?
It was a big day in my life, and I was there in Budapest. We had the ambassador there. We had the prime minister of Hungary. It was a very nice ceremony, and Hungary is a fabulous country, and a strong NATO ally. So I was very proud to take that decoration. Thank you.
One of the cool things about doing Zoom is not only that I can see you, but I can see what's around you. And I notice what looks like a map behind your head. What's going on there?
It's a map of the Caribbean, of the eastern half of the Caribbean, and I'm visiting my daughter at the moment in Atlanta. She likes maps also, so I put up a map of the Caribbean, but there's a news hook to it, if you will, and that's that unwatched by many, a massive Iranian warship is headed into the Caribbean. And strapped on the top of this thing, it's a large floating forward basing kind of ship called the Macron. On the top of it are 6 high-speed missile boats, presumably for delivery to our friend, if you will, I say that facetiously, Nicolas Maduro, the dictator of Venezuela, because Iran and Venezuela have very close ties. So think about the same kind of Iranian speedboats that are harassing merchant shipping, our warships in the Arabian Gulf, 7 of them being delivered, I bet we're going to see over the next couple of weeks to Venezuela. Not a good development for U.S. Southern Command.
Does the U.S. have anything like the Monroe Doctrine anymore?
We do not have an enforced Monroe Doctrine. Students of history will remember this was the policy in the 19th century that the United States said to other global powers, we got this. We're going to kind of be the ones in charge of the Caribbean. That has fallen by the wayside, but the United States retains, obviously, an enormous degree of interest in this massive shared water space, Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean Sea, loaded with natural resources, many U.S. allies, partners, and friends in that area of the world, notably Colombia along the southern edge of it, notably Central American nations on the western edge of it, notably many of the Caribbean island nations, former British colonies, for example, all part of the United States' network. So, yeah, we're still quite involved there, but these are high seas. So to the premise of your question, can the Iranians drive in there? Yeah, these are international waters. But here's what I would be asking if I were commander of Southern Command. Is this, if it is an arms transfer, is that in violation of sanctions we have imposed on Iran or sanctions we have imposed on Venezuela? I'm going to bet that it is both. Mm-hmm. That would be something the cohort of military planners in Miami, where the headquarters of Southern Command is located, will be focused on.
And I suppose if it is what you think it is, and if they do get delivered, and they do any kind of harassing behavior like the Iranian fast boats do sometimes, I think the Venezuelans would probably find a lot less patience in our reaction to them than we are inclined to use in our reaction to some of the Iranian boats.
I think that is a good analogy. And by the way, it wouldn't just be the United States. It would be, for example, the Colombian Navy, which is quite capable, right next door, would have very little patience for that kind of tactic. But it's worrisome. Whenever you see Iran coming into this hemisphere, working with a rogue regime like Venezuela, and let's not forget Cuba, just north of there, it starts to look like, a bit of an axis of evil going from Caracas up to Havana, now being supported by an influx of potentially weapons from Tehran. That's concerning. Now, again, I want to emphasize that ship is underway. It's not in the Caribbean yet. No announcements have been made, probably because of the sanctions issues. Let's see how this develops. But that's why the map is up over my right shoulder.
For those of you just joining, my very special guest, Admiral James Stavridis. You can watch us both live right now if you go to facebook.com/630khow. And if you haven't read 2034, A Novel of the Next World War, you definitely should. As well, the Admiral's most recent nonfiction book, Sailing True North, 10 Admirals and the Voyage of Character, also a wonderful read. Oh, speaking of 2034, a little birdie told me that you and Elliot are going to write a couple more books, that you've been picked up by the publisher to do some more. Is that right?
It is correct. We're very excited. My co-author, Elliot Ackerman, who is a war correspondent, a Silver Star recipient, 5 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, White House fellow, an accomplished novelist. This is his 5th novel. So the two of us have now been contracted to do a sequel to 2034 and a 3rd book. It'll be a trilogy, Ross. And obviously the first one is 2034. The next one is going to be 2054. It'll follow the storylines and the surviving characters into 2054. And then the 3rd and final book in the trilogy, at least at this point, is 2074, following again deep into the 21st century. So the next 2 will deal not only with China and the outcome of the events in 2034, but also the rise of artificial intelligence, the rise of cyber security vulnerabilities. Space will be an important part of it as we move deeper into the century.
Let's stick with cyber. There was a key cyber and I don't know what you'd call it, sort of like war against signals intelligence kind of stuff in 2034. And you've been writing and talking a lot about cyber. So, in recent days, we've been hearing a lot really on the civilian side about cyber kind of stuff, ransomware from Russia. Who, in addition to Russia, are the other main actors that we need to worry about in the cyber space? And in what ways are their goals different from each other?
Yeah, I'll sketch it very quickly. But Russia, I think, is the principal adversary we face, and their intent goes across the spectrum from offensive cyber that could be used against our critical infrastructure by the Russian state, to the fact that they are aiding and abetting, at a minimum, protecting these ransomware kind of attacks, undermining our cyber security. So Russia is a nation state proposition. Number 2 would be China, which has been involved more on the intellectual property theft, garden variety espionage, but at a very high level, but is starting to bubble up more toward offensive nation state cyber. The other 2 I'll mention are the obvious ones, North Korea and Iran, both of which are not at the level of Russia and China, but have the ability to be nuisance actors in this space. Over the last 5 years, we've seen North Korea, for example, attack Sony Pictures, an American corporation, motion picture entity, causing a couple of $100 million worth of damage. I'd call that an attack. And then North Korea has made some forays against our infrastructure, notably the water infrastructure, both north and south in the United States. Those are the 4 principal nations I'd be most concerned about.
How do you think the United States, in both government/military and private sector, are doing enough or beginning to do enough to defend ourselves against cyber threats? I'll tell you, Jim, cyber attacks against critical infrastructure scare the bejesus out of me. I mean,
they should.
There are plenty of novels about it, right? But you can imagine the electricity going off in half the country for a month?
I can, because it happened not in the United States, but in Ukraine just a few years ago. Russia dropped the western half of the grid, the electric grid in Ukraine. Unfortunately, this is not the stuff of novels. This is a capability that exists. It's been demonstrated. We would be foolish not to recognize the danger into which we are standing. And look, I've been coding since the 1970s. I attended a class with Rear Admiral Grace Hopper, the so-called mother of COBOL, one of the early programming languages which she invented. I've been at this a long time. I am more concerned now than at any point, and a big reason for it that civilians perhaps don't appreciate, because it's kind of a wonderful thing at the same time, is the expansion of the Internet of Things, the way you can clap your hands and the lights go on in your house, the way you can close your garage door that you forgot to do from 25 miles away or 2,500 miles away. It's wonderful, right? but it's an enormous threat surface. Every one of those devices plugged into the internet becomes a way that an opponent can get in, get to the next device, undermine it. And to close on this, let's go back 10 years ago. There were 7 billion devices connected to the internet 10 years ago. Today, there are 50 billion devices connected to the internet. That's from 2011 to 2021. And it's great, except when it isn't, because it's a huge, vulnerable threat surface.
All right, two quick comments in response. I saw a story 2 weeks ago about an air fryer that sort of white hat hacking team had found an internet vulnerability in this air fryer, just to kind of get to the point that you're talking about. And did you know that many states' unemployment computer systems still run on COBOL?
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely.
It's an incredible thing because they got buried with all these people applying for unemployment during COVID, and they needed to do some things to try to keep up with it. And they were having a hard time finding programmers, and they had to go look for these, 50, 60, 70-year-old retired COBOL programmers because the young kids didn't know anything about it. That's kind of a funny story.
No, it really is. And I'll give you another one to Google if you're interested. I forget which casino in Las Vegas, might have been the Mirage or the Sands. One of the big casinos has a huge aquarium in it, in the front of it. The aquarium, of course, is computer controlled. Hackers got in through the aquarium in the lobby and zipped right up to payroll and to the high roller lists, and were able to tap into the accounts of a whole series of high rollers. Again, huge threat surface. Watch your aquarium.
Oh, my gosh. I don't know about the Sands, but I know for sure Mirage has a huge aquarium right behind the check-in desk. So I've checked in there quite a few times. All right, let's see if we can do two things quickly. A lot of people talk about China as having a goal of wanting to dominate their region rather than wanting to dominate the world. Do you agree with that analysis?
Absolutely not. I'm a big believer in listening when people tell you what they're going to do. And President Xi has been talking consistently since he became the leader of China about the China century, about China's role as the global superpower. The Belt and Road Initiative is a mercantile, geoeconomic, geostrategic strategy that stretches from China across the Indian Ocean to Africa, north to Europe. We see China actively involved in Latin America and the Caribbean here in our own hemisphere. China has global aspirations. That's, as the boss would say, that's a fact, Jack.
I agree with you. All right, last thing I want to ask you about. Do you have any thoughts about how across much of the United States, very much of Europe, there were public demonstrations in favor of the terrorist group known as Hamas rather than in favor of the only free, tolerant, liberal democracy in the Middle East during the recent Israel-Hamas battle?
I find it so often the public sees the world in kind of a cartoon version. And certainly Hamas is a terrorist group. Hamas unleashed hundreds, thousands of rockets against Israel, doing so completely indiscriminately. The only reason Israeli casualties were so low is because Israel has excellent air defense systems, excellent air warning systems, a network of shelters throughout the country. They're organized and we're able to hold those down. But thousands of rockets coming in from the Gaza Strip, why you would be holding one-sided demonstrations to say that a terrorist group should gain our support is surprising and disappointing to me. Having said that, I believe in what's called the two-state solution. This is the idea that over time, Palestine ought to become a country, so Palestinians have a country, so Israel can get out of the business, which I don't think they enjoy greatly, of, if you will, keeping an eye on the West Bank. And so, as always, there's two sides to the story, but when one side is a known terrorist group and is indiscriminately launching thousands of rockets, they don't deserve your support.
And the Palestinians could have peace now if they said they wanted it. If they'd stop teaching their kids, with geography books that don't show Israel on the map and stop teaching their kids that Jews are descended from animals and so on, they could have peace
exactly
today.
Right.
They could have peace today.
And by the way, to close, Iran, just continue to watch Iranian influence here, because the next muscle movement, Gaza is south of Israel. To the north of Israel, in parts of Lebanon, are not thousands of surface-to-surface missiles. There are tens of thousands, 50,000, 60,000, under the control of Hezbollah, a Shia terrorist group that occupies much of southern Lebanon and has the capability to unleash a terrible damage, 100% supported by Iran. That's the other terrorist group that we all ought to be careful to observe. And by the way, I want to draw a line under Israel. I was, as the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO and Commander U.S. European Command, one of my duties was the U.S.-Israeli military relationship. I went to Israel frequently. I know all of the key players. It is a dynamic ally, partner, and friend with a superb cybersecurity intelligence capability, a military second to none in that region. There's a lot to admire about Israel.
Absolutely. Folks, my special guest, again, has been Admiral James Stavridis, NATO Supreme Allied Commander, and many, many other things. Again, if you haven't read 2034, A Novel of the Next World War yet, go buy it today and read it. And as I said, prepare to be simultaneously entertained and frightened, which I imagine will be what we will get from your next two books with Elliot Ackerman as well. And congrats again on getting picked up for two more books. It's a great thing, especially coming out of your very first novel after writing so many nonfiction books. It's very well done.
Thanks so much. And next time, let's do it in studio in Denver.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you, Admiral.
Okay, see you later. Bye-bye, everybody.
Take it easy. All right, folks, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Love that guy. All right, when we come back, I'm going to do something very, very different. Denver Public Schools seems to have a problem with Tay Anderson. Well, now they're spending your tax dollars in part on trying to figure out how to message about that to the public.
KHOW Denver, 630 KHOW, an iHeartRadio station. Available everywhere on our free iHeartRadio app. #1 for music